Welcome to Neural Narrations. To make things clear, this is not actually Jordan Peterson. This is just a neural network made to sound like him. The real Jordan Peterson does not endorse anything said in any video on this channel. This story was written by MrFrontenac. You can find his information in the description. They finally found my family. When I turned 18 and moved off to college, I promised myself to never return home. I know it seems dramatic. The statement is one of those adolescent eye rolls, but I didn't make some public pledge like the countless kids who do so just after they're dropped off at the dorms. It was a secret and one I promised myself I'd keep. My parents wouldn't care or call if I never came back. They couldn't call or email. They were old school, a euphemism for being belligerently stubborn to change. But with some of that stubborn blood in me, I figured I had a better chance of sticking to my promise. Of course, I did end up coming home. However, I hope you'll see that it was hard not to go back on my word. After all, it's not every day the county sheriff dogs your phone like a debt collector and begs you to drop everything to fly across the country. I didn't even pay for my plane ticket. The police department did. It hardly counts as coming home. You see, the occasion was that they had found my family. Just after I left for college, my mom, dad, and sisters vanished into thin air. They had been missing for an estimated 6 years, though only 5 were confirmed, as it took the town the better part of a year to find out they were missing in the first place. Honestly, I'm a little surprised it didn't take longer. My parents were not friendly people. They weren't particularly mean either, but they didn't have friends and didn't make small talk. They barely even spoke to me. My sisters were older and had still lived at home, but by the time I was in high school they were hardly ever around. Ever since I left for college, there'd be no trace of them either. Their unnoticed disappearance was aided by the fact that my family lived on a secluded estate on the outskirts of town. It was an 11,000 square foot mansion surrounded by fields and connected to the county road by a quarter-mile driveway. It was an ugly, cruel-looking place built of gigantic blocks of brown stone. Despite being more labyrinth than home, when I was told that their bodies had been found inside and were likely there all along, I couldn't speak. Hadn't investigators searched the house? Was there some hidden room no one had known about? Even when they called telling me they'd found the bodies, I was reluctant to return. The sheriff gave me the disturbing details as gently as he could, and I drank throughout the conversation until those details got nice and blurry around the edges. He said if I wasn't going to come back, to please provide them with the basics, a DNA swab, a written statement, anything that could help. I mailed everything I could in a manila envelope, content to wash my hands of my past, but my curiosity got the best of me and I folded. A few days after mailing everything, I kissed my girlfriend on the cheek and stepped into the security line at San Diego International Airport. Regardless if I returned home, the rumors were finding me across the country anyway. I was ignoring a dozen calls a day from old friends I had hoped to never hear from again. When the bodies were found and the investigation began, all the town gossip regarding my parents' initial disappearance was compiled. The townspeople agreed that my parents' car had disappeared the same week I moved out to go to college. But no one had seen them leave. Of course, it was unlikely that their single car departing in the night would be noticed by anyone. The only problem was that the house was empty. There were no furnishings, no china dishes, no fucking wallpaper. Everyone agreed it would take a battalion of moving trucks to ferry away all the lamps and books and leather couches that house must have held. But there were no moving trucks. That would have been noticed. Could it have been emptied by thieves after they left, carrying one piece at a time? Perhaps, said the police. But the logistics of my parents' shit didn't concern me. To be honest, when I found out they went missing the summer going into sophomore year, I felt relief. Now I would really never have to go home. The town didn't have an airport and it would be more than an hour's drive from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Luckily, I was getting a ride and I was not all that shocked when I was greeted at the terminal by every investigative agent in the county. Unsolved quadruple homicides are few and far between in the heartland. The sheriff stepped forward. Sam. He smiled somberly. Hey, Sheriff. From my turbulent youth, I knew Sheriff Kane personally. After 6 years away, I saw he had become an old man now, though still large and mustached. He had told me after one of my worst nights that landed me in the little county cell that he was on a path to prison too before getting sober decades before I was born. He shook my hand. I'd shaken it before when I was younger as a deal between would-be degenerates to get my shit together. It was firm then. Now his soft, sorry handshake sent shivers down my spine. I moved down the line of faces and shook hands with the county workers I knew from the other hats they wore in town. Coroner Pope, my pediatrician. Officer Mann, my geography teacher. All their hands were limp and feeble in my own. I was the man with the dead family. I was the man made of glass. Don't worry, son. No reporters, like I promised, said the sheriff. I nodded, and soon I was in the back of a police SUV racing across the plains at 90 miles per hour. It was a police escort, lights flashing. Oncoming traffic steered to the shoulder, the whole 9 yards. My parents were already dead, and as bad as it sounds, all I could think was, what's the rush? I understood it was important to find their killers as soon as possible, but while their bodies were found last week, they'd likely been dead since I moved out 6 whole years ago. The sun was setting when we rolled into town. The escort's lights dimmed and the SUV I was in pulled into the city's only motel while the rest kept driving. We've already got your room. The cop held a key card in between his fingers and I took it. It's room 14. The police station is too small for the crowd we're having tomorrow. We're leading the investigation out of the community center on Pleasant Street. We're getting started at 9 a.m. What are we doing there? We're going over everything we know, starting from scratch. We can pick you up, or he nodded his head down the block. You can walk. It's 5 minutes from here. I remember, thanks. And don't worry. No press is allowed in. If anyone bugs you or if there's anything you need, you just call Kane. And Sam, the cop, paused. I'm sorry about all this. Yeah, again, thanks. I grabbed my small duffel and went to my room. Inside, I looked around briefly. The motel was cleaner than what I'd pictured the countless times I'd driven by it growing up. The room was cold, and the blackout curtains were drawn. I kept them closed and laid on the bed in the dark. Here I was, home again. I thought about going to the liquor store and getting drunk so I could sleep, but thought better of it. I didn't want to deal with the details of my dead family hungover. Instead, I stared at the stucco ceiling, and I thought, that was a bad idea. I rose in an existential panic a few minutes later and paced the room. I could be alone. I unlocked my phone. I still had a few friends in town and called my closest one, Jake. He picked up on the first ring. Sam. Hey, Jake. You've been thinking of calling. Really, I'm sorry, I thought you had enough on your mind. Man, I laughed. I'm the one who left and never called. I'm the one who should feel guilty. Well, what's up? I just got into town. I heard you were coming. You trying to go on a night walk? Jake and I had this thing in high school where when there was nothing to do, often as that was, we'd roam the town and country roads talking and drinking for miles. Dude. Jake spoke as if dumbfounded by coincidence. I literally just left the liquor store. I met him outside my motel room not 20 minutes later, and he awkwardly hugged me with a 6-pack in one hand. Man. Jake placed one of his massive palms on my shoulder and leaned back. Did you get shorter? I laugh. No, you somehow got even taller, circus freak. I didn't move away. I kept eating corn and drinking milk. Do they even have dairy on the West Coast, or are you some almond milk freak now? What's it like being so tall and so stupid? Boy, is it nice, he smiled. No girl has ever expected me to find the clit, and oh boy do I get praised like a dog when I do. You're telling me the townie girls finally developed a fetish for old Frankenstein? Once you left, I was the prime entree, my friend. He playfully tapped my leg with the 6-pack. So where are we walking to? You're not gonna like it. His happy expression dropped. You don't want to go there, do you? Yeah, I do. Just to see it. We can't go inside. It's a crime scene anyway. He cracked a beer and started drinking. Okay, he sighed and looked towards the direction of my old house. I can do that. By the time we were walking on the shoulder of the county highway, it was already dark. We spent most of the way there talking about mutual acquaintances in town. The topic of the murders had been avoided until then. After a silence between topics, Jake downed another beer and tossed the bottle into the weeds. I stopped and pointed. You really still doing that shit? What? Tossing your beers in the ditch. We're not 18 anymore, man. You've got some weird priorities right now. I shook my head and kept walking. It was late summer and the sound of crickets in the grass gave the air a sleepy feel that made the silence we shared easy. We were almost to the house when Jake cleared his throat. So you don't have to talk about any of this shit with me if you don't want to. But I've been hearing the craziest rumors. Yeah. Do you know what I'm talking about? I nodded at my feet. That's all just bullshit, right? The things these farm wives can come up with. He laughed uncomfortably. Stranger than fiction. I didn't say anything. My old childhood home had come into view. There were no lights on, and in the dark its silhouette was outlined sinisterly. They're just rumors, right, Sam? There was fear in his voice, and while I heard him perfectly, I still could bring myself to speak as I watched the house in the distance. I looked at him. Those farm wives actually put it all together pretty well. Even in the black I could see his face blanch. You're fucking with me. I shook my head. Oh fuck it. Jake yanked a beer from the pack and twisted off the cap. I'm so sorry, Sam. He tilted his head back and drank deeply. Everyone in this town is. I sighed. Jake finished his beer with a burp, but this time he put it back in the cardboard six-pack. As soon as he did, he pulled out another, and I couldn't help but smile. Afraid. Jake nodded as he put the new bottle to his lips. I suppose we should be scared. Come on. The gate will be locked, but if we cut through this field, we can get close. I started walking faster, giving Jake little time to protest. We crossed the field and stepped over the property line where soybeans turned to weeds. The house never had a lawn, at least that I can remember. My parents never cut the grass, and apart from the driveway, most of the property was overgrown with prairie. We got within 30 feet of the house before we stopped in the waist-high grass. Jake reached behind his back and pulled out a pint he'd pinned in his belt. I heard him crack the plastic cap, drink, and smelled the whiskey as he passed me the little bottle. I took a long pull. The air glugged back several times before I lowered the pint and sucked air noisily through my teeth to steady my stomach. Why would you ever want to come back here? I ignored his question. This piss liquor reminds me how the water here always tasted like shit. All this grandeur and it could beat the tap water from a trailer park. Jake said nothing. Do you remember when this place burned? I would have been your age when that happened. I heard about it. I could see where the coral-colored stone was stained with soot from when the flames licked from the windows. It burned the week we moved in, just a few days after apparently. The entire interior had to be rebuilt. I was 2 or 3 and I don't remember a thing, but my family never treated me the same afterwards. Growing up, I thought the fire was somehow my fault, even if I did hold a candle to the drapes who blames a baby, or holds a grudge at least. But my parents, I frowned. Well, they seemed like the kind of people who would do that, didn't they? Can I just say it? I felt like I read his thoughts and smiled. Sure. Fuck, he exhaled in relief. I know you weren't close, but God, those folks gave me the creeps. I met them twice and couldn't sleep both nights. I shrugged. No hard feelings. Your sisters, too. I'm glad they weren't in our grade. Yeah. Were you closer with your sisters? No, not really. But they were normal to me. Jake nodded and took another swig. He wiped his mouth with his hand and patted my back. Sam. Yeah. Can we get the fuck out of here? Yeah. I laughed, but just then our attention was taken to the road where gravel crunched under something heavy. It took a second to make it out in the dark, but an enormous object crept towards us. Suddenly we were blinded. and we squinted and threw our faces towards the dark. "You kids." "Oh shit." Jake was already pounding away through the brush. "Cops." I stood still. "Jake, get back here. That's our ride." I saw the outline of the officer get out the driver's door. "Did you hear me? You there? You're trespassing." I thought we made it clear to all you kids that this place was under 24-hour watch and any more trespassers will be prosecuted. "No buts." "Sorry, I haven't been out here for a while." "Did you hear me? No buts." Sheriff said to prosecute the next teens dumb enough to fuck around this place to send a message. That can be us. "Fuck, kid. I don't want to book you. You a Royals fan?" "No." "Well, it's the 11th inning and I ain't missing a pitch." Now your friend there's got the right idea. You go on now and run from the police. I started walking closer. I was thinking maybe a ride for old time's sake. "Huh." He squinted and stepped further from the car. "Oh shit. How you doing?" "Sam," he said in disbelief and looked at the house. "What are you doing here?" "Remembering, for whatever that's worth." I raised my arms and let them smack my sides. "I'm sorry." He glanced me over as if he were looking for something he had seen when I used to live there. "I'm so sorry." "Yeah. Don't worry about it. You can't bring people back from the dead anyway." He shook his head to clear it. "So that must have been the big guy." He pointed into the prairie. "I thought I saw a glimpse of Sasquatch when I hit those brights." "Yeah. Jake, get out here." We were both silent as we listened to the grass rustle. There was a distant shout. "Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure. Do you want to walk back to town?" I turned to the officer. "You don't mind giving me a ride back to the motel?" "No. Course not. Anything." "Thanks. Come on, Jake." We watched Jake stand and tower over the grass. In just a few steps it seemed like it covered 100 feet and he stood next to me. "Hey, Officer Cooper." I should have known. Was it his idea to come out here? He pointed at Jake. "God, no." Jake wasn't paying us any attention as he brushed dirt off the plastic pint. "This scaredy cat." I walked closer to the squad car. "Can we drink in the car?" Jake wiggled the whiskey. "Jake, you big, dumb son of a bitch, you don't even fit in my cruiser. We've been over this. I'm taking Sam, but you can walk." "I told you that's just if you're stuffing more than one guy in the back." "Sam rides shotgun." "Watch, then I'll fit." The cop waved dismissively and got in the driver's seat. When we started up the drive, there was still the comfortable sound of baseball on the radio, with the strong voice of the announcer and the soft cheering and chattering of thousands of fans behind him. It was hard to feel any fear. I pictured the stadium, the billions of bugs whirling under the lights, the tired kids leaning against their nervous fathers with fingers sticky from cotton candy, ready to go to bed. I managed to forget where I was and smiled. So Officer Cooper turned off the radio and broke the silence. "I've been hearing all sorts of rumors running around." I leaned my head into my hand and closed my eyes. He picked at his collar. "That's all just bullshit, right?" When I woke in the morning, I considered it a good thing that I was still drunk and not hungover. Jake and I had gotten dropped off at the liquor store and walked back to my motel. I don't remember much of the night, but at some point, Jake had left because the other bed was empty. One of the deputies had given me a wake-up call at 8 and I showered, drank a couple warm beers to keep the buzz going, and dressed. I walked to the community center. Some press was set up with their satellite trucks in front of the building. Sheriff Kane had been on the lookout for me. And when I was getting close, worrying I'd be recognized, he led me around the block and through the back. I was ushered into a medium-sized event room with 3 long tables forming a horseshoe, and they sat me at the center. At the end of the room on a cart was a big black Panasonic where our reflections fish-eyed in the dark glass. Every seat in the room was already full, and based on the empty paper cups of coffee that many officials had in front of them, it looked like this conference had started an hour or more earlier. A woman in suit stood as I sat. She wore her hair up, and I glanced, a pistol bulging on her hip. "Mr. Martin." "Please," I said quickly. "Sam's fine." "Of course, I'm sorry." She smiled at me pityingly. "Thanks for coming. We can't imagine what this must be like, and before we get started, I want to make clear that we can stop whenever you like if you need a break." "That's fine." "Okay. My name is Casey Olin, and I'm the lead investigator on this case with the state PD. You're going to be hearing from a lot of people today." She turned to the table to her right and pointed. "We have Richard Pope, the Clayton County coroner." He lifted his hand from the table in a weak wave. "Greg Mayer, our fire marshal until 2012. Sophia Mendez and Rick Wheeler are here from the University of Iowa, where they specialize in forensic pathology. I understand you must have a lot of questions, and of course we have a lot for you." I kept trying to make eye contact with those she introduced, but they only tightly smiled and awkwardly flipped through the papers in front of them. "I think it's best we get this over with right away so we can get started in earnest. If you want to adjourn for a while, that will be totally fine." She looked into my eyes, and I was glad to finally return a gaze. "I'm so sorry, Sam. Your DNA results came back last night with a 99.9% chance for both paternity and maternity." The room was silent while they stared at me. I inhaled audibly and sighed for a long time. "I figured as much." "Right, we've been told that you talked on the phone before coming here with Sheriff Kane about the circumstances surrounding the bodies." I remember the call, but not the details. I had gotten so drunk during it that the only thing that remained in my memory was some hint of a horrible thesis. I was drunk then in that stuffy community center, and feeling like a child enough already I didn't want to seem any more ignorant. I leaned forward as if to speak into a microphone, even though there was none. "That is correct." It felt like the entire room exhaled. People nodded, and Casey smiled. "Okay, we're going to take everything back a bit now. Can we start with where you moved from? We're pulling records, but it's bureaucratic and going to take some time." "My family had moved here from Massachusetts." "A small town there?" "Well, something port." "Newburyport." "Yes," I said. "And do you remember who told you that?" "No." "Do you remember living there?" "Oh, I would have been 2 or something." "No." "Maybe we should start at your first memory. Do you have any idea what that may be, Sam?" I squinted, remembering the feeling of heat on my face. "I do. I saw my childhood home burning in the night. I remember the fire." "Are you referring to when your home burned in 2001? "Yes." "That's great. That's a really great place to start." Greg here was the fire marshal then, and one of the first on the scene. Casey gestured to Greg, but he stayed sitting. When she kept her arm extended to him, he realized he was being called on and stood abruptly. "Hi, is Sam." He turned on the television and hit some buttons, and static filled the screen. Some of you may remember David Child. He was a teenager at the time of the fire and perhaps a pyromaniac. He liked to follow the department around and film fires. Luckily, he made it out there when the Martin home burned. I've got the tape here. He hit play, and there we were. It was a beautiful shot. My parents stood with their backs to the camera, and my little sisters were standing at their feet. All of them stood stoically still as they watched the home burn in the night. They held a toddler in their arms. Me, I realized, and smiled. The fire marshal shifted uncomfortably. "Now this video is just 7 minutes of this. See, there's no hydrants out there, and the fire was already so progressed there wasn't much to do anyway but let it burn out." "But," I frowned as the fire marshal stuttered, and his voice began to get nasally with tears. "I found you that night, Sam. Just after we pulled up, I found you wandering around the outskirts of the fire all by yourself. Of course, your folks had just moved in that week. Nobody had ever met them. I didn't know what they looked like." He pinched his nose and squinted. "I was carrying you around thinking your folks were dead in the fire when suddenly I saw those people staring at the flames. I swear they had not been there before, but it was dark and a little hectic. They must have been waiting under those cottonwoods. I brought you over to them. He paused, trying to compose himself, and sobbed. I put you in their arms. I was angry at his guilt. I should be the one crying. I should be the one who gets to break down. Casey saw my skull and patted the fire marshal's shoulder. She gestured to his chair and he sat. I'm sorry, Sam. The marshal got a little ahead of what you know. Based on the unignited accelerant found on the bodies and the carbon dating, we believe that the night of the fire was likely the first contact you and anyone in town made with the suspects. Suspects, I thought and frowned. Sam, are you with us? I'm not sure. The room quietly wheeled. Everyone looked at one another and shifted in their folding chairs. Sam, I'm sorry, but I'm going to need to know you're following this 100%. I believe you said Sheriff Kane explained the situation when he called. I don't remember. Casey hesitated but then spoke firmly. The bodies found in the home that the DNA identified as your biological parents have been there for more than 2 decades. I said nothing. The lead suspects in this case are the people that raised you. We believe they may be responsible for the murder of your birth mother and father. Where were they found? I heard myself suddenly say, your biological parents. Yes. Somehow the others in the room grew even more uncomfortable. Your parents were found in the basement, in the water cistern specifically. And that water cistern, I paused. It's used for storage. The fire marshal covered his mouth and we all watched him speed walk from the room before Casey continued. No, it's the main source for the home. I said, I want to emphasize that the water was very cold year-round. The bodies were surprisingly well preserved and never entered into advanced decomposition. I couldn't speak anymore. I stared in shocked horror at the TV screen. The video was still playing, and I watched as the woman's hair fluttered in the wind. She held me in her arms as the fire flickered beautifully in front of her. So, who were these people that didn't mind the taste of rotting flesh in the tap water? Who waited in the windbreak for my family to go to sleep before murdering them in the night only to vanish after raising me for 16 years? Sam! In that moment I felt nothing but a terrible clarity that whoever they were, I was going to stop at nothing until I found out. But the answers I found were so insidious I only wish now I'd ran from the room. Sam, we need to know you're following everything. Would you like a break? No! I pictured my parents floating in the cistern and bit my tongue to keep from crying. I understand, I said. You finally found my family. I hope you enjoyed the story tonight. If you did, consider subscribing to hear more.